So, everybody, welcome. This is Figma for EDU, Figma Draw Foundations, a Figma for EDU monthly workshop. So, we are going to be working in Figma Design. So, Figma Draw is a set of features that exists within Figma Design's tools. It augments the vector capabilities within Figma and allows for a lot more visual expression. Some of the features that we're going to be covering today are variable width stroke, the added shortcuts that you can use with variable width stroke. We have added behaviors with that feature as well. We have offset vector, we have simplify vector, we have pattern fills, radial repeats, vector selection, effects, texture, glass, progressive blur effects. We have new types of strokes, so brushes. We have dynamic strokes, we have width profiles, we have stretch and scatter brushes. We're going to talk about vector on a path as well. All of these features can be used interconnectedly to help you create better visuals. One of the first visuals I'm going to cover here today is a plant cell diagram. Because we are always thinking about the educational use cases here, I remember back in school drawing out these diagrams by hand. And with Figma's tools. So Figma is primarily a vector design tool. And what that means is if I go back to Figma design here, you'll notice this pen icon, right? The pen tool allows you to draw nodes, and these nodes allow for the creation of graphics, right? Every single one of these graphics have a fill or a stroke. So the stroke on its own, it's an outline. When I swap the fill and the stroke, or if I add a fill right here and I can give it a color, right, you can see that representation here. You can see how that aligns. Now, that's great and it's graphic and it's clean and it's crisp, but sometimes you need a bit more personality, right? That's where Figma Draw comes in. So when you're looking at an illustration like this, you're seeing texture, right? You're starting to see, the way things are a bit more organic, right? You're starting to see some feathered gradients act in a particular way. So what Figma Draw does, one of its core components allows for more of that organic expression. And what better way to have organic expression than with a plant cell? So we're going to cover some of the ways that you can utilize these effects to kind of create something that is more dynamic, has a bit more texture. So if you're following along, you can actually take your upon yourselves to explore. I'm going to hold down the Option key, that's the Alt key on Windows, and I can actually duplicate after I select any one of these objects, right? And you can see some of them are grouped and you can move them out. So if you want to begin to inspect them and see what is being done to kind of create that graphic. So one of the key features of Figma Draw is going to be its effects, and I'm going to kind of show you how that works. So if we're going to come down here, I'm just going to like select some of these objects. I'm going to move them down. And I'm actually going to move over from Figma Design. So the way that you access the kind of primary window for Figma Draw is to go into draw mode. Now, many of the features exist both in Figma Design and in Figma Draw. So there's just different ways of accessing them. When you enable Figma Draw, the interface becomes a little bit more suitable for creating this style of graphics. If I come down here, I can actually see like a brush. So I can actually like color pick a brush. And when I'm drawing with it, I can begin to see some of these textures. What this brush is a stretch brush. And what it's doing is basically taking a graphic and stretching it along its path. When you have a stretch brush, that brush that's being applied, what you're doing is you're drawing vector points in the same way that you would be with the vector path tool or with the pencil tool. But now you'll notice the brush can actually be live updated. So I'm going to move this panel over here. I'll show you exactly what I've done. Now that I've drawn in that brush, I can come over here to the right-hand panel. You're going to notice it's underneath the stroke panel. And when I click that drop down, you're going to see there's a number of different brushes that are there. So Many of these brushes come default and are available in Figma Draw. One of the great things about the brushes is you can create your own brushes. We're going to talk about that shortly. But so as I'm navigating down here, I'm going to pick a brush that I particularly like. Melodrama is a brush that is actually based off of my own marker stretch. So at Figma, I had the opportunity to design and work on a number of these brushes, and Melodrama is one of my favorites. So if I am drawing here, I can see when I click, I'm working with Melodrama, and I can represent that out. Now, you're going to notice that that has a lot of character, it has a lot of appeal. Right now, I'm currently drawing with my brush tool, right? And I'm drawing with my mouse. You can use, if you're using a Mac, a sidecar with an iPad and put this window onto your iPad and draw with an Apple Pencil. So that is something that you can explore if you have a Mac and an iPad and Apple Pencil. If you're working with a Chromebook touchscreen, you can draw and work directly on the screen itself. So a couple other things here. This is being mapped onto this graphic. And what that does is it gives you the ability to change its direction. So even here, when I select this brush, I can change the direction of its starting point and its end point. So that's going to mean different things for different brushes. So I just switched to the splat brush that we have here, and you can see it kind of changes how that works. Now, speaking of brushes, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to click my mouse over here to the left. I'm going to select them all. I'm going to delete them. I'm going to choose a different type of brush now. This is actually a newer type of brush that we have. These are called scatter brushes. So if a stretch brush, what that does is it takes an existing graphic and it stretches it along a path. We have these scatter brushes. You'll notice that they sit underneath the stretch brushes. And what's great about these is that it takes a graphic and it's essentially replicating it as you draw. And there's a number of additional properties that you can begin to change with that. So here you can notice I can actually change the amount of gap. So the spacing between that, I can change the size jitter. So essentially what it's doing there is it's randomizing the placement of that size up and down. And I can even change the angle of that as I am drawing with that brush. Now that I made those changes, you can then see them reflected here. Now, when you swap that out for a different brush, you can start to see that different brushes features. And once again, you can begin to change how that brush is working. So to get to the brush tool here, I just saw that question, how do we get the brush? What you're going to do is when you open up a Figma design file, you're going to click onto the draw tab. You're going to see the brush tool. So the brush tool is going to be one way to access the brushes. However, let's say that you are already just working with a graphic, you have something. So here I'm going to choose the polygon tool in Figma, right? So I'm clicking down here onto the toolbar. I am choosing the polygon tool and I'm going to draw out a polygon. And here at the lower right, you see there's a count. I'm going to expand that up. So I'm going to create a hexagon here. Now, when I select that hexagon, right now that hexagon has a fill, it doesn't have a stroke. So I'm going to click stroke. It's going to create a black stroke. I'm going to increase the weight of that. Here too, I can choose whether or not the stroke is positioned on the inside of the shape, the center of the shape, so it kind of outlines the outside of the inside of the shape, or just be positioned entirely on the outside of the shape. So there it is, it's on the outside. Now, here, I can, instead of coming over here and trying to manually apply a brush, I can just change the stroke on the shape and come over here to the right within that stroke panel because it's the outline of that shape. And there I can then choose brush. right? So what that's then going to do, it's going to apply any given brush that I have selected. There's a drop down here. It's going to navigate through all of the different brushes that I have. And you can see it is then being applied to that shape. I can change the direction of it. And then in addition, we're going to talk about this concept of width profiles, but you can actually change the width of that stroke to be variable along its path. So right now it's making its way around this hexagon. And so there's its starting point, it's making its way around, and you can actually change the thickness of it as it makes its way around. And this is what's known as the variable width tool. So all of these features that we're going to be talking about, they're kind of interconnected and interrelated in different ways. And it's going to allow you to get the character, the style, or the visual style that you're trying to accomplish when you're working with a graphic. So when I take a look back at what I have here, you can actually see the hexagon that exists. And then you can see that I've roughened the edges of that hexagon to be more organic. So even when I'm working with this, let's say I take that fill, I make that fill black, and I even apply a corner radius, right? I want to round out those edges. I can apply a corner radius, and that changes how that brush is being applied to that fill. That being said, you don't just have to use a brush. When you click into the stroke settings, you're going to see that there's three different options, right? There's going to be basic stroke, there's going to be dynamic stroke. The dynamic stroke, once again, just gives you a nice bit of texture. You can wiggle it, you can smooth it out, right? And so this is going to give you a bit more character, more interest, more texture, make it a bit more organic when you're working with that shape. All right, let's see. So yes, you can change the stroke to be on the inner side of the shape. So when I select this here, I can actually come in. Let's make this a little bit bigger. So let's remove the width profile. And so sometimes when you change you could change the position. However, once you change the style, it will impact where you can kind of like lock that position. So when you're working with a basic stroke, you can essentially choose if it's on the inside, the outside. You're going to see other options as well based off of like how are the strokes going to join. And if you wanted a dotted line type of a stroke as well. So what I encourage you to do is begin to identify what are the settings that you're working with. So here, this kind of like stroked pattern, I can actually reduce the size of the dash significantly or increase it. And you'll even see here when I created the nucleus that I was actually using that dashed effect, to my advantage. All right. So someone asked how to use iPad to use Figma Draw. You want to use Sidecar. So you must use it with your Mac. So the Mac will connect to your iPad. It uses your iPad as like an additional window. And then you could send your like Figma desktop to it. And it will accept your Apple Pencil as the brush. Okay, cool. So the first thing that we talked about is we talked about brushes, we've talked about strokes, and we started talking about this variable width. So I'm going to talk about that really quickly. So let's say if I was to draw out another stroke here, right? I draw out a path. Once again, when I double click inside, I can see all of the individual points that make up that path. So if I was to draw this brush just like this, when I double click, you can see there's a lot of additional points that are being generated to kind of create this. Now, a new feature that we released about 2 weeks ago, when I select that path, let's say I want to smooth it out, right? I want to go through and remove some of those points. If you click and press delete, right, it'll actually break the path. Okay, so I'll show you that one more time. If I select this path that I have here, it's a vector path. If I select one of those points and I press delete, it'll break it. However, if I select it and I press shift delete, right, it'll smoothen it out. So if I was to select two of those path points and press shift delete, it will remove them and then heal the remaining bit of that shape to keep it in line. Now, that's one way to smoothen that path, right? Because oftentimes you don't want your artwork to become too complex. If you want to make any adjustments of that point, right, it can be difficult because you have these extraneous dots all along that line. Now, what you can do is when I select that path object, you're going to notice these little options down here. This option right here is called simplify vector. What simplify vector does is it looks at the path that I currently have selected. You can see we have all of these additional dots. And then as I drag this to the left, it will start to remove some of those points that are creating that path and simplify it. Now we might oversimplify it. Maybe that's not what we want. So I can actually bring this and find the happy medium that's going to reduce the amount of points necessary to create this graph, create this line. And you can see here, I can always go in and kind of like readjust any of those points. So now that I have this, another feature that we're going to talk about is variable width stroke. I'll show you one more time. So I said somebody missed it. When I select this graphic, right? So I'm selecting the graphic. I'm not on the inside of it. I'm just selecting it. You're going to notice this little option down here to the right called simplify vector. When you click on it, you'll then see this panel show up. Let's make my interface a little bit bigger so it's easier for y'all to see in the recording. And so with this enabled, it'll allow me to simplify that path down, and you'll see how that works. So this becomes really helpful. So let's say when you're using this brush tool, and like I'm gonna make a little drawing of like myself really quick, I'm drawing, boop, boop, boop. I got that mustache. Got my ear coming out, little AirPod, right? And so as I'm drawing this out, when I select any of these paths, let's select them. I'm going to select just one of them. I can come here, choose simplify vector, and then I can reduce those points because I actually might not need all of those points to articulate the path. I might want to clean it up. And so that's going to reduce it down. There we go. I can actually take it all the way. And you can see it's reducing that down. And then once again, because I've done this with a brush, if I don't like that particular brush, I can come over here to the right. I could change the direction of that brush and I can choose a different brush outright. And once again, I'm going to come down to melodrama. Melodrama is my favorite brush. That's the one that I love the most. There we go. I'm going to give myself little eyeballs there. Boop, boop. Just drawing a little big circle. There we go. That's me. Yeah. All right. So once again, you can even come over here and I can change the weight, right? It's because these brushes are, once again, they're vector, right? It's being mapped there. So a lot of these properties, many of these properties can be changed after the fact. So yes, the pencil tool does the same thing. All the pencil tool does is it's drawing vector points. So I can, with the pencil tool, also use simplify vector, and then you'll see how it reduces it down. And if I go all the way to the left, it's basically taking it down to 2 points. And mentioned before, there's other ways too. So I can go in here, and actually I'll take this moment to highlight yet again another feature that has been kind of made available with Figma Draw. You're going to notice this little lasso tool down here, right? The shortcut for that is the Q key. And what that lets you do is select points using this cool little lasso tool. So let's say I wanted to go in and manually like clean those up of my own accord, right? I want to go through and select which points I want to delete. When I press Shift Delete, it'll clean that up. So I can say with the lasso tool, oh, okay, I'm going to select these 2 points and then press Shift Delete. I'm going to select these points here and then press Shift Delete. So the lasso tool is going to give you the ability to be much more intentional about which points you are going to delete. And it'll let me kind of come in here and select them as part of a group and then Shift Delete. And you can see how that cleans up. So the lasso tool, I think, is like a hidden gem within the Figma Draw tool set. All right. So once again, where the lasso tool lives, whenever you select and double click into a vector graphic. So right now, when I have it selected, I could see what are the available options, right? But when I double click into it and then I'm actually editing it at the point level where I can change those individual points, right? That's where I'm going to see the lasso tool, and it's going to be the Q key. There's going to be some other tools here. Actually, let's take the opportunity to talk about variable width stroke. We talked about it momentarily. Variable width stroke is the same thing as the width profile. And what it does is it allows you to have different stroke widths along the path that you are working with. So you can see here, I can begin to expand and give, more kind of like more articulation, more character to this stroke as I'm moving along this illustration. So really quick, if I was to, let's say if I was to just draw this little line and I come in by double clicking, I can see the variable width stroke tool is available. I can click here and then I can select that point and match it out. Now, let's say you want to type in a very specific value. You can just double click in there and say, I want this to be 32, right? And then I can press the tab key. And then when I press the tab key, it finds the next variable with stroke point. And then I can say this is 12. So let's say if I add in another one, right, I could type in a value and say this is 32 again. So when I press tab, it will find every variable width node point, right? And oops. And when I do that, if I want to edit it, I just type in the value. So I could say, 48, and that'll make that a lot thicker. I can control it on the keyboard. And yeah, so that gives you like a lot of potential. Now I can select two of them at the same time, or let's say all three, and hold down the shift key when selecting them, and then that will bring them all together at the same time. So let's say I just wanted to edit this first one and this last one. I don't want to edit this one. I press the shift key when I clicked it. So just these two are selected and I can edit those two at the same time. So this is going to give you a lot more control. All right. So cool. I'm gonna show you really quick. Let's see, what's a fun thing. I did a video recently on how I made the endoplasmic reticulum. One cool thing about this and the way that Figma draws effects work is that it gives me this opportunity. Right now, I believe I'm using a dynamic stroke. I'm using some boolean operations to kind of create this, and I can show you how I do that. So here we're gonna kind of like talk about a bunch of Figma's features kind of all being used at the same time. I'm gonna press the O key. I'm gonna draw a circle. Yeah, endoplasmic reticulum. You didn't know I knew that. I do know that word. I was good in biology in high school. So when I click the arc, I can open this up, right? So what I did here, I press the O key, I draw in a circle. When I draw that circle and I select the circle, there's this little dot here that pulls up the arc tool. Now with the arc tool, I can kind of like open this up and change the sweep value. From here, I can open up the ratio and I can even change the starting point. So these properties are non-destructive and you can see them represent here: start, sweep, and ratio. So as I'm beginning to play with this, that gives me, that control. Now, what I do with this though, is I'm actually going to bring it all the way to the edge and I'm going to swap the fill and the stroke. So right now the fill is gray and the stroke is nothing. So I press Shift X and I'm going to increase the stroke width and I'm going to put it into the center. So you can see here now that I'm playing just with the stroke of that arc. And so I can even come through and then snap little round end cap points, right? So then I can kind of like make just this edge. And what's cool about that is then the weight of let's make that a little bit darker. There we go. The weight of that can get heavier and lesser. So now that this is a stroke value, right, I can do other things. I can add a dynamic brush to this, right? I can apply, wiggle, I can smoothen, right? So I can begin to, change the properties of it. Sometimes, you might get some like weird little edges, right? I make sure my endpoints are round and like you can see that they're kind of roughed out or they're a little bit smooth, right? So I can kind of make that a little bit rougher. And so, let's say if I have a few of these, I'm going to press Command D. That's going to duplicate that. Command D. I just made another copy of itself and I can move the start point of it. Right. And so you can kind of see like, okay, cool. Like I got another little piece, right? I can change, the sweep and like the start point, and I'm starting to get, it to be a little bit more dynamic. And I can duplicate that and by Command D, Control D if you're on Windows, and then I can even scale this down, right? And with it scaled down, it'll still kind of keep its nice little like circle points. So you can see here, I have these 3 stroke points, right? They have their like little respective roughen. Um, and what I can do is I can actually like flatten, I can kind of union all of these together. So when I union them, right, they're now kind of brought in together. I'll show you that one more time. So if I come down here, all of the boolean operations in Figma are down here. What it allows you to do is either kind of like flatten out temporarily graphics or subtract a graphic from one another. If I was to have like 2 circles over here to the left and I select them, let's make them red, and I was to do the same operation, right? I could subtract one from the other, right? I could find the midpoint between them. I could exclude the midpoint, or I can union them. And when I union them, right, I can make like, other like little, I can like, kind of do that. It sees it as like one whole object, right? So when they're unioned, if I press Shift X, I swap the fill and the stroke, right? I get this kind of like output object, but it could still be edited from the inside within that union. I could still make those changes. So this is effectively, I can select all of those. I could union them together, which gives them this fill. And then I can add another stroke, on top of that. Right. And so this is what's going to give me the ability to still go inside of that union, right? And then make adjustments still, right? And that, we got that dynamic stroke on there. So sometimes it gets a little rough and janky, but you kind of get the graphic that you want. And then within that union, I can, draw in like a little connector. So let's say in here, let's say I want to draw in a little connector inside the union. Let's draw a little pencil tool thing. Where's my pencil go? There we go. It's up there. So I'm going to put it inside of the union. I'm going to make that a little bit thicker. There we go. So I've taken that little vector graph and I put it in there, and you can see now that it's inside of the union, right? Everything that's applied to the union is the like effects, and then everything that's in here is kind of put together. So I could even take that little piece there and then rotate it. And then there you go. So I have this kind of like fun kind of constructed thing, and I could change that fill to be the purple, and I could change that stroke to be the dark purple. And so this kind of creation of graphics in a way becomes, like gives you a lot more control over how you put that. And once again, I put the dynamic stroke kind of like on all of those like individual objects. And if you want to, let me see, I think it might even be better to apply it onto the union. So let's say if I go in here and I remove the dynamic stroke, you see it's just a feature, it's just a function, right? And then what I do is I go to the union and there we go. I apply the dynamic stroke to the union, and then I get that like organic nature to it. There we go, right there. So it's on the union on the outset itself. And then that way I can double click, I can go inside, and then I can still make my fun little adjustments. I could duplicate that, right? Bring this down, you know, and have my little like endoplasmic reticulum graphic. Cool. So all of those are on the inside. So yeah, all of the graphics that are made in Figma can be transferable to Figma sites. So you'll be able to paste them out. All right. So once again, we were talking about brush strokes. And I'll show you really quickly how to make your own custom brush strokes. So all of these brush strokes were made in Figma. These are scatter brushes. I'll show you really quickly how to do so. Um, you can just start out with something as simple as a rectangle. So I draw a rectangle here. I'm going to make that black. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a bit organic. I'm going to draw away from it with, let's say, like a green pencil. So I'm going to, oop, that's way too thick. Let's go much thinner. There we go. So I'm going to make a little jaggy. I'm going to be like in and out. There we go. There we go. In and out, in and out. And I'm going to draw a little shape down here. And what I'm doing is I'm drawing a shape. Let's select those two endpoints and join them. Actually, I could just select it and join it, and then use the Bezier curve tool to, smooth it out. I can swap that with the fill and the stroke. This is a shortcut I already mentioned earlier. So Shift X, I'm going to swap the fill and the stroke. I have this nice little jaggy thing, right? So I'm going to use one side to cut away from one side. And then I'm going to duplicate that and have another side cut away from the other side. And let's say I go in here and select those points, right? Selection tool. Here we go. Let's use that selection tool. Shift delete and Shift delete. And let's just move that point down. So let's say I'm going to make this fun little jagged brush here, right? I can select both of these, that object as well, and come down here and choose the subtract option, right? So what I've done is I've cut away from that and I've made this funky looking brush. So I have flat edges. Maybe that's something I want. Maybe I don't. But what I want to do here is that we've mentioned with these boolean operations, right? This object is it's still in there, right? It's still non-destructive. So these like little pieces are still very much a part of it. In order for me to make this a brush, I need to flatten it. And that's an option that we have right here. It's called flatten. When you flatten it, you're accepting the changes that you made. You're like burning them in. It's kind of like point of no return. So we're going to flatten it. And you'll notice that when I go in, we actually have all of those points that kind of make up that thing. And now that we have this funky shape, I can right click and go to create brush. And so we can create a stretch brush. So a stretch brush is just an object. It's going to stretch along with the brush from edge to edge, or a scatter brush is going to draw it again and again. So we're going to choose stretch brush. And so now when I come over here to my brush tool, come all the way down, let's find the one that we just created. It's called subtract, and that's because it's looking at the layer that it was created. If we rename that, it would give it a better name, but you can also just rename your brush right here. When you put a brush into any file, that file will see that brush and then include it in the brush dropdown. So we're going to rename this brush to, workshop brush. This is our workshop brush. And now that we have it, I can now draw with it. You'll notice that some brushes are going to work better than others. So through a bit of trial and error, you're going to start to figure out what works and what doesn't. The longer you draw with the brush, the smoother it kind of becomes. And you can always go back in and choose the variable width tool to kind of like adjust your width profile of your brush to give it a bit more character. So now if I was to create a scatter brush, you could see I actually have some existing ones up here. I have this speckle, right? I have this like angled pencil marks. You can see how they kind of work with the scatter brush. So I'm going to make a very simple one. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to go to the ellipse tool. I'm going to draw a little circle. I'm going to open up my arc. I'm just going to have like a little ring, right? We're going to have like a little ring. I'm going to set that as black. And once again, I'm going to come down here, flatten it. Now that it's been flattened, let's give it a name. I'm going to call this my O brush and right click, create brush and scatter brush. So we have the scatter brush created. Now, when I go to my brush tool and I come down here, I can look for my O brush. There it is. There's my O brush. When I draw with it initially, it's basically just drawing that like little O over and over again. We can select it, come over here to the right and begin to change some of those properties. What is the gap between it, right? How much is the size variation, right? What is going to be the angle? Because it's perfectly circle, we're not going to see the angled difference of it, but that's okay. So I can give this a color and you can see like, oh, that's kind of cool. So once I kind of apply that, right, I can start to get this effect. And now you'll notice that this is still very much tied to that path. But if you want to expand it, let's say you want to break this apart and edit all those little O's and move them around of your own accord. I can right click, I can outline stroke, right? And now that I've outlined this as stroke, I could see all of these little paths and yeah, I could go in and these are now like little separate objects that I can cut out of here and kind of move around. Yeah, that didn't do it exactly what I wanted to. But yeah, so now they're flattened. And like I could just change that however I want. So it's no longer like a path brush, but it's kind of like a flattened graphic that I can do what I want with now. All right, cool. So let's see. The randomizing option's cool. Yeah, absolutely love it. Yeah, they're like fun little like soda bubbles, and it's really cool to make your own custom brushes that you can then kind of use. Or like even here, now that I've made this, right, I can now cut away from this bigger. Oh, I can select them both, and I can use it as a subtract, right? And then I've kind of made this graphic here that has that texture subtracted from another. So what these tools do is provide you the opportunity for more expression and more options and new ways for you to think about how you might approach, creating something. So even here, what I could do is, come in with like this like vaporwave brush, right? I can like begin to draw that in. Oops, and like I could do like just like various things with it. I can like use a mask to cut this out to like only show up on the inside, things like that. And so I'll show you what that means. So if I draw like a circle, you know and like if I have the brush here, I could draw in with the brush, and I'm going to move this down. So if I select them both, I'm going to group them together. So Command G, or you can say group selection. And this ellipse here, what I could do is I can make it a mask. So I can right click, use as mask. And then I've just masked it out. So there it is. So then I can move it from within that mask. And then I can kind of use it as like a little bit of texture on the edge of like a graphic. I can take that ellipse, I can, get a copy of it and paste it out. Oops. Copy, paste. There you go. And then this one, I don't want it to be a mask. So I'm going to say remove mask. There you go. So you can kind of see I have the circle, this one is going to be like the mask version of it, and the circle can be like green or whatever. And then that's how you can do it. So you could use the mask to like kind of crop out the edges of the vector. All right, so I have another example here. I'm going to use this example to kind of highlight some of these other features that we've been talking about. And so this is something that I made in Figma pre-Figma Draw. And I'm going to use it as just kind of like a way to kind of highlight some of these features. So let's say, and you can see over here, this is a group. You can see all of the like little individual pieces that make it, right? I can select and kind of move the legs, right? So this is, I have a bunch of like different like legs, and I kind of put this together. I layered this up. But let's say I have this. Let's say I want to create this really cool outline that goes all the way around the squid. So I'm going to show you something that's fun. I'm going to select that whole squid, right? And I'm gonna duplicate it up here just so you can kind of see what I'm doing. I showed you that flatten object, right? So we can union it. So I'm going to just union it and just take all of those shapes, all those strokes. I'm just bring it as one color, right? So I'll show you that one more time. So this very complex graphic, right? What I want to do is I want to make a fun outline behind it. So I can select it and I can union it so it's all together, right? So it's a single fill. And I'm going to bring this down so it's highlighted just over. So you can see it kind of snaps over that whole drawing. And now I'm going to send it behind the whole group. So you can even see my layers over here on the left. They're very visual. When you're in Figma Draw, your layers panel is very visual. And you can see I put it behind everything. And I'm going to call this my like outline. And so I'm going to use another feature that we haven't really talked about yet. I'm going to select my octopus, or is it my squid layer. I'm going to lock it, and I'm going to come to this outline, and we're going to flatten the outline. Let's flatten it. Boom, flattened, right? And so now that the outline has been flattened, you can now see I have this offset vector option. And what that's going to allow me to do is create this nice little offset to kind of create a fun stroke behind the whole thing. So I'm creating like a path offset. So if I hide the squid layer, you'll kind of see what I'm doing, where I'm like offsetting the whole thing. And then we can like show the squid again. And then that gives us that outline. And then once I'm ready to accept it, let's say if you see any sharp edges, it's been the case before where like, see when I go out really far, you see these sharp edges, I can actually round those out with the little round tool. But let's say for now, I get it right about there. And then once I accept it, this is a destructive operation. So there you go. I accepted it. So that offset vector path is really, really useful. So like, let's say I was creating a tentacle. I can show you how I can make a tentacle from that. But now that I've done this, right, I could change this fill, to be whatever I want. Let's say I want to be like a dark blue or something like, like the ocean. And let's go to effects, and I'm going to try the texture effect. And then here you can see the texture being applied. This is similar to what we were doing at the dynamic stroke. But sometimes you get these like really cool kind of like fuzzy textures. So it's a lot of fun. It's something you kind of like play around with, where you would normally take this flat vector path, and now you can kind of start to get, like really cool kind of like organic values from it. And the great thing about it is it's still vector, right? It's still rendering it out. I could zoom in and I could see that detail that's coming about as a bit of that texture. So being able to do something like this in Figma before, just really, really hard. So I'm going to lock that layer. I'm going to go back to my squid. And now that I've selected my squid, let's try another effect that's part of Figma Draw. So I'm going to come over here to the effects panel, and let's do layer blur. So what's cool in Figma Draw, or what Figma Draw brings, is this thing called a progressive blur. And the progressive blur allows you to have one part of the drawing like really blurred out. And then like, you can change the level of blur both from the start and the end point. And what's really cool is whatever layer that it's currently affecting, you can kind of see it then be applied. So there we go. I just applied it. And so if I want to kind of, have kind of like a foreground effect, or, I'm exaggerating it right now, but you can kind of see, you can start to play with that. And once again, this is like a non-destructive effect. So once I apply it, or if I go back into my graphic, I can still, change the vector graphic, and the layer blur is then applied to it, right? So you have a lot of fun there. So yeah, so thinking about how I might construct the like a squid leg now, like in Figma, I might even just start from a single path. I can use variable with stroke. I can use offset vector to then like pull out from that stroke and give it a style. And then here, what I can do is I can then use like a inner shadow to kind of create highlights. So I'll show you exactly what that looks like. So once again, I can start with just like a vector path. I can double click inside of it and then use, the variable width to kind of like control the like start and, the endpoint of the tentacle. And then from here, if I use offset vector, right, I can actually change kind of like that width. That also then kind of makes it an actual fill. So I can then give that a stroke. So I give it like a little stroke value. And then even here, if I want to use variable with stroke, I can begin to like adjust the variable with stroke property of it. If I wish, I could even simplify some of those vector points to kind of like adjust, how I'm working with it, even though it's not doing terrible. It's actually looking pretty good. And then let's just press OK. And then, one thing I'm doing here, like to get that like little inside light, I come over here and I go to effects and I'll use an inner shadow. The inner shadow will kind of move its X value. I'm going to set the color to 100%, and white, and just remove the blur. And you can kind of see it's starting to give me that effect. So I can begin to adjust, how it's being aligned. And I can even change the position of that stroke to be like inside or outside, as I'm kind of like working with it and creating it. So you can start to think about how you might kind of create and craft your own illustrations. Um, so a few things about textures. Like let's say if I take this circle and I apply, let's say an effect, like a little texture effect, right? And I'm like, cool, like I got this cool texture effect. You see it happening to the outside, and if I clip to shape, you're like, wait, where did it go? Um, Clip to shape is helpful when you have that your selection has multiple colors or like ranges, right? So this is currently just being applied to a circle with a gradient. Once I include some of that texture, right? If I want it to honor that outside shape, I just click clip to shape, and the texture then becomes part of it. So same thing here. If I have this graphic, I'm going to press Command Y, Control Y. Actually, I don't know what it is on Windows. I'm going to type Command K and say outline, show outlines, right? Show outlines shows you the outlines of the graphic. So if I press Command K and then turn off show outlines, I can see that there. So if I was to apply the texture to this, right? There we go, texture. If I want it only to apply to the inside, I click to clip to shape. And then here, I can then give more of that personality and that texture to whatever is inside of that group. So we actually have a multitude of different, shapes and such that comprise this. But because I'm applying the texture to the outside most group, everything that's inside of it and then clipped will get that texture. I didn't talk about patterns yet. I'm going to cover patterns. I know we're getting a little bit close on time, but pattern fills are great. Any object that you have on the canvas can be applied as a pattern. So if I select this, fill that I have of my squid, I can come and I can add another fill. I'm going to choose a pattern fill. Pattern fills are great. You select a source. So here I selected a dot. I'm going to make sure I set that opacity to 100%. And then here I could actually change like the spacing, the orientation, the X position, the Y position, the scale, like of any pattern that I want. I could select source again and choose an entirely other different object. I can go to that original object. And if I update it, you will then see it apply live to the object that has the pattern. How cool is that? So once again, I can go back to my object, click on pattern, go to select source, and choose another shape. And once again, I can make any adjustments to that shape. I can make the shape larger, smaller, or by selecting the shape itself, clicking on that pattern, I can then begin to make adjustments to it. You can even apply a pattern to a pattern, and that will yes, a pattern layer can overlay to another. So let's say here, this circle, right? All right, let's make that arrow black, right? And let's have the circle have a pattern of the arrow, right? Let's make sure that opacity sets 100%. And so the circle has the pattern, and then this will have the pattern of the circle with the pattern. And so if I make any updates to that arrow, the arrow updates the circle pattern, then updates onto the squid. So if I change adjustments here as well, I could reduce that shape. How cool is that? And then this one accepts it. So you can actually have kind of like degrees of patterning, and they will totally live update for the various types of effects that you wish to create. Once again, I think this is really cool because it provides for a bit of experimentation and play within the tool itself. And this just is probably one of the tools that have made patterning as easy as possible. So we're going to kind of close things out. Let's see which I didn't cover. All right, so we kind of covered with profiles. Yes. I didn't cover glass. I can kind of highlight that really quickly. So there's still a few things that we haven't covered, like text on a path. So I'll kind of close out with some of those concepts. Here, just a few more illustrations I want to show. Like I could take this like really complex illustration, Command Y, with all of these different levels and graphics, and whatever layer you select to have the effect, right? It and all of its children will then get that effect. I just want to highlight that here. So if I go to texture, right, the texture will just be applied to that selected object and its children, right? And I can like clip that to shape. So you can see like the patterns are within it. So if I turn that off and I can remove it, I can apply this once again to the whole graphic. I can select the whole thing. I can say clip content. So it's clipping within a frame in Figma. And then here I can come in, apply the texture effect, and you can see that right there and make those adjustments. And if it's happening to the outset, you don't want it affecting the outset, you can clip to shape and you'll get a nice clean shape around the edge. All right, so lastly, let's cover shape on a path. I'm going to draw a circle and press the T key for text tool. And I could just click on that circle and I could say, hello world, right? And so here there's, I could flip hello world to be on the inside or the outside of that shape. And I can like adjust the text. And even here, I could change its start position. And, happy designing. Say happy designing, and all of those text properties are there and still maintained. So I can adjust its size, letter spacing, and just change where it's coming from. And some of you are probably asking, like, what if I have a like a little wild path here? I can select that. I can simplify it and accept that and press the T key. and say happy designing, and it'll go on that path proper. Oops, yeah, redo. And let's make that text black. And so if I make, like, yeah, there you go. You have that. It's being applied. Um, so I kind of showed that earlier, like here where we had like cell wall, cell membrane, mitochondria. So just to kind of see like a use case for that. All right. Last thing really quick, I'll show you. I'm going to draw an arrow. Let's draw an arrow. I'm going to click on that point and I'm going to make a thick arrow. And I'm going to show you all the vector path. If you come up here to vector path, right, there's radial repeat. Radial repeat will just give you the opportunity to kind of create objects that you can, oops, I could change the properties for. So when I click on the repeat, I could say how many objects I want, what's the gap that I want between them. I could change it to linear or radial, and it'll be pretty optimized in how you kind of make that. And then you could always go in and like adjust the main object. All right. So tons of different things that you can use. A lot of different features. You can kind of use the features together. They inspire a lot of creativity. As mentioned, it's great for like diagrams, great for product illustrations, great for adding a bit of character to your shapes. So if you're absolutely lost, you don't know how to draw, just start building from basic shapes. Start from square one, pick a fill, try like a linear, make simple things more complex, and you will find you'll have a lot of fun with that. So start with basic shapes. So here I can like, take a couple shapes and I can merge them together, and I can flatten them, and I can add a stroke, and then that stroke can be whatever I want it to be. I can give it a brush edge, and I can start to play with colors, and there's actually so much more. I could probably sit here all day and start to delve into these things. But a couple other quick notes: if you're using variables and color variables and design systems, you can absolutely associate those colors onto your drawings and create different modes for drawings. You can create like light mode, dark mode versions of your drawings, and have like a lot more control and fun with that. I'm going to head on over to questions. So can you upload brushes from outside sources? So you can bring in brushes from outside sources. You could just paste in an SVG, right? So you can copy something as an SVG, you can bring in a Figma, you can make it as a brush. You can't bring in like a brush format. So like if you were so inclined, you were in like another tool and you have a vector kind of brush, you can paste in an SVG and totally make it as a brush in Figma. Can use Apple Pencil and iPad. For Figma without a Mac, unfortunately, no, not yet. You do need a Mac to use with Sidecar and your iPad in order for Apple Pencil to work with it in the best way. Are strokes monochrome only? Strokes are not monochrome, so strokes can be. So here we go. Let me draw a brush. Let me draw one of these brushes. Here we go. So I could take that brush. I can apply a pattern fill to it. I can apply a gradient fill to it. I can even, make that brush filled with my face. Hold on, let me see. Well, let me give it a fill. Let's see. I thought I could. No. Oh, it won't let me. Oh, wait. Let's do. Oh, I think. Oh, okay. All right. So you can do gradients. Let me see. Here you go. Upload from computer. Let's see if it'll let me do it. Figma documents, assets, animals. Here we go. Yeah. So right now it's actually it's technically a puppy. You could see the little puppy's eyes. So, if I come in with a brush, right? I can come over here and copy that stroke and paste it, and it's revealing a puppy. There you go. So I can even come in and change that to a crop, and I can move the puppy into view. So you'd be surprised what you can actually accomplish pretty easily in Figma. All right, so all types of colors, gradients, images even. Is there a way to add a point between already two? This is actually a really good question. Figma does a really good job of this. So if I'm in Figma and I have this shape, I want to add a point in between those 2 points. It's always going to find the exact center. So it's always going to find the exact center, and it makes it a lot easier for you to bifurcate any path. So that's actually a pretty good question. So you can always, with the pen tool, add a point between two existing points. Is Mickey's accent from Boston, New York, or where? I'm from Buffalo, New York. So it's part being Puerto Rican, part Buffalo, and part growing up with Canadian broadcasting TV. Best Figma for ED workshop ever. Oh, thank you. I really appreciate y'all. So thank y'all for joining. Really appreciate you all. Be sure to sign up for the next one. Love going through these with you all. Thank you, and thank you especially to Alex. Alex, you have anything to say?